Morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this important conversation today. And thank you, DA McMahon, for participating in this important conversation on decriminalizing mental health. Thank you also to the Greenburger Center for partnering with John Jay to educate the public about the problems associated with putting people in with mental health issues into a criminal justice system that is not prepared to deal with their needs and therefore often fails those people and does not advance public safety. The problem of the criminalization of mental health is not unique to New York City. In fact, this issue was raised at convenings John Jay hosted last fall in partnership with the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, NOBLE. These future public safety convenings brought together elected officials, advocates, researchers, community leaders, and criminal justice leaders from across the country to talk about the most pressing public safety challenges. The consensus of this impressive group of leaders who participated in the future of public safety convenings was that we need to reorient our society to treat mental illness and related issues of substance misuse and homelessness with treatment and services rather than a criminal justice response. And district attorneys were part of that important conversation. Our Future of Public Safety report highlighted models that are designed to protect people in mental health crisis, such as Denver's Support Team Assistance Response Program that sends a team that includes a mental health professional to appropriate 911 calls. Criminal justice system involvement too often leads to tragic consequences for people who are experiencing mental health issues. We know of many situations where people in crisis or with unmet need for mental health treatment have been harmed by police, prosecuted without regard for their need for treatment, and incarcerated in jails and prisons that are simply not designed to provide effective treatment. As a result, here in New York City, many criminal justice agencies and stakeholders are changing the way they approach people with mental health. In prior programs, we heard from other district attorneys in the Bronx and Brooklyn who are taking steps to address the criminalization of mental illness. We're looking forward to hearing how District Attorney McMahon is addressing this important issue. Before we begin this conversation, I'd like to tell you a bit about District Attorney McMahon's background. Prior to serving as district attorney, Michael McMahon served as a community board member and counsel to 2 New York State Assembly members and a city councilman. In 2001, DA McMahon successfully ran for the North Shore City Council seat, where he served for 3 terms. In November 2008, DA McMahon was elected to represent Staten Island and Southern Brooklyn in the U.S. House of Representatives. Here, DA McMahon continued to successfully represent his constituents by helping pass the James Zagruda 911 compensation law and the legislation that created the Iron Dome air defense system over Israel. He created the Invisible Wounds Caucus, which focused on veterans' mental health issues, including the unacceptable rash of suicides. He was elected as the DA in Staten Island in 2015 and won re-election in 2019. So as you can see, he's well equipped to address these issues from many different perspectives. We also have a fantastic partner and moderator for today's event, Greenburger Center's Executive Director, Cheryl Roberts. In addition to serving as the Executive Director of the Greenburger Center, Cheryl is the Corporation Counsel for the City of Hudson, New York. Previously, Cheryl was a town judge in Columbia County, New York, and served as a counsel to committees in both the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. So we are going to have a lively conversation with 2 people who are well equipped to understand this issue from so many perspectives. So I will now turn the conversation over to Cheryl to start this important conversation with DA McMahon.
Good morning. Thank you, Carol. And good morning, DA. It's good to see you again. Thank you for being here. You are one of 4 DAs on a panel the Greenburger Center held 2 years ago about the criminalization of mental illness. And we are glad to have you back and looking forward to the next hour and learning more about what you are doing in Staten Island. We're also so pleased to be partnering with John Jay College of Criminal Justice on these conversations. And we are particularly honored that President Carol Mason provided those opening remarks. I wanted to take a moment to give a little background on President Mason, something I haven't done in the last conversations, but it's important to remember that Carol Mason was nominated by and served with President Barack Obama as Assistant Attorney General at the Department of Justice, where she headed DOJ's Office of Justice Programs and oversaw an annual budget of $4 billion, which supported an array of state and local criminal justice agencies, juvenile justice programs, and services for crime victims. President Mason also oversaw the National Institute of Justice and the Bureau of Justice Statistics and led the department's work to address the issue of community trust in the justice system. In May of 2017, Carol was appointed to the president of John Jay College. So thank you, President Mason, for partnering with us. It's our honor, and thank you for your introductory remarks. So now let's get to some questions for you, Mr. DA. As Carol mentioned, you served in Congress, and when you were there, you co-founded the Invisible Wounds Caucus, which focused on veterans' mental health, as Carol said, particularly the high rates of suicides among veterans. Every day, between 17 and 18 vets die by suicide. When asked about the caucus and the increasing rates of suicide among vets, you said, quote, "It's our problem. We own it." And I think the sense of ownership is a critical aspect of the solution, end quote. So today we need to talk about suicide rates on Rikers Island right now. Anthony Scott, who lived with autism and mental illness, attempted suicide by hanging on Thursday while at Rikers awaiting disposition of his case out of a Manhattan court. He had been held on $15,000 cash bail, accused of punching a nurse in the face at Manhattan Hospital. He was taken off life support and died yesterday, becoming the 14th person to die at Rikers this year. He was, of course, more than a statistic to his loved ones, but today we need to acknowledge that. And I want to ask if you think the same applies here today. Do we all own Mr. Scott's death and the deaths of others at Rikers? And what policies have you implemented in your office to address the situation at Rikers?
Thank you very much, Cheryl, and thank you very much for having me. And I want to thank President Mason and everyone at John Jay for partnering not only in this program, but being such great partners for those in the working in the criminal justice system every day. And I want to thank the Greenburger Center as well for partnering with us on today's program, but also confronting the mental health crisis that we face in our society, in particular in the criminal justice system. And let me be very clear to Mr. Scott's family and his loved ones. Our heart goes out to them, and we're sorry what happened there. And we're sorry also to the other lives who have been lost to suicide and those who suffer under conditions at Rikers Island. And you're right, we all own the conditions at Rikers Island, and we all own the mental health crisis here in our city and in our country. And you know, back in 2009, when I entered Congress, the suicide rate amongst our returning service members and those in this country was hovering around 10%. And unfortunately now, as you quoted, those numbers have nearly doubled. And at the time, it was from a personal point of view, but also just as a leader of my borough and of Brooklyn, it was important that we confront this issue because we as a society owe it to our service members and to anyone with mental illness to provide them with the safety net that they need. And we were able to get billions of dollars towards service members' mental health at that time, but clearly it was not enough. And unfortunately, not staying in Congress, I couldn't stay on that issue in that position. But when I came in to be district attorney in 2016, we immediately realized that we had a mental health crisis here in our borough, in our community, and we went about to do what we could to work on it. Regarding Rikers Island and the conditions there, and I was out a few days ago or a few weeks ago with DA Cy Vance to tour the facility and see the conditions there, and they are reprehensible, and it is a shame on the city. But the reality is that we also need some sort of facility to hold individuals who are either in crisis and a threat to themselves and a threat to society. Those who wanted to close Rikers Island, I said to them nearly 6 or 7 years ago that if you want to close Rikers Island, that's a laudable goal. but you need to maintain that facility in a humane way in the interim. Even under the best timeline, the new facilities that are proposed in the other 4 boroughs in the city will not be ready for 5, 6, 7 years. And yet this administration, this city council, this city has allowed conditions to deteriorate so dramatically on Rikers Island that we've totally got a situation that is not acceptable to all. In our office, we've worked very hard to reduce the number of cases where we seek to hold someone in pretrial detention. We do our best to try to find some sort of mental health program, an alternative to incarceration. In fact, we've increased close to 40% of the cases that we prosecute. We recommend for alternatives to incarceration, where someone is given the services that they need to help them with the conditions that they suffer from. But of course, Staten Island, being the forgotten borough, we do not have the resources that the other boroughs have. We do not have a full misdemeanor and felony treatment court for mental health cases. And so my staff has to provide a lot of those services themselves. I have on my staff a clinical social worker. I have a peer mentor who reaches out to those who are in crisis, and we try to provide those services. But the point I think that has to be made here is that this is a real problem, and it can only be solved with real solutions. And that means a commitment to provide a safe place, whether it's housing, residential treatment, institutionalized treatment when necessary, and we are not providing that in our society.
Thank you, DA. So let's get into more of those solutions. I want to talk about your HOPE program, which stands for Heroin Overdose Prevention and Education. According to your website, HOPE is a first of its kind diversion program in New York City, which redirects low-level drug offenders on Staten Island, pre-arraignment, that's before they get to a judge, to community-based health and treatment services instead of jail and prosecution. So can you explain your program and tell us what percentage of your program participants have a co-occurring mental illness?
So when we came into office in 2016, we realized that sort of astride with the mental health crisis, Staten Island was in the throes of a terrible addiction illness crisis. And obviously in many instances, there is a comorbidity, if you will, of mental health and addiction illness. And we were seeing dramatically high rates of fatal and non-fatal overdoses in our borough. In fact, a young man, just before I came into office, overdosed on his front lawn in front of his parents' house, 2 o'clock in the morning, a few doors away from where I live. And it struck me as what a terrible crisis is. Imagine you're a parent and you come out on your front lawn and you watch your 22-year-old son die from an apparent heroin overdose. So when I came into office, I asked for the investigation into that overdose to find out what had happened. And I was told that if someone died from an overdose, it's considered an accidental death, and there was no investigation being done. And so I set about to work with our partners in the police department to investigate every overdose death in the borough so that we could figure out what was going on. And we saw that the numbers were dramatic. In May of 2016, 10 Staten Islanders died from an apparent heroin overdose. And so as we started to gather that information and realized that the crisis was much more severe than the statistics that we were getting from the Department of Health, we decided that we had to intervene more quickly, at least with those individuals who come into the criminal justice system. The way it was at that time, if someone was arrested for misdemeanor possession, they would sort of go through the revolving door of criminal justice and be released again, and nothing meaningful was done. And if there was a larger amount of drugs present, maybe a felony, but nothing was being done to address the issue. And because fentanyl was now on the scene and one more application could be so fatal, we wanted to intervene more quickly. So we developed a HOPE program. After 10 months of really brainstorming at the table behind me with program providers, with the police department, with the city Department of Health, State Oasis, we came up with a program where now if someone is arrested for controlled substance possession, instead of going through the normal course of the criminal justice system, they would be met at the precinct by a peer mentor who would be dispatched there from our office, who would explain to the individual, look, the DA has a deal for you. Come with us or go in the next few days to get an assessment, have a program tailored for you individually. And if you follow that for 30 days, whatever that program is, your case will be dismissed. We decline to prosecute that case. And that's how the whole program developed. And from that planning process, we were able to establish centers for resource recovery centers where people could go 24 hours a day to get assessed, to get connected to services, and to have a more meaningful touch with the criminal justice system, if you will, and hopefully get them onto a better path. And since we started that program on Martin Luther King Day in 2017, and I'm just looking over to Amanda Wexler, who is that licensed clinical social worker and helps me remember the facts and details. Over 1,000 people have been through that program or the Hope 2.0 program have been successfully diverted from the criminal justice system, connected to services, and we have about over an 80% success rate as measured by rearrest. So it's a program we're very proud of, and it's been duplicated now in the other 4 boroughs in the city and in other parts of the country as well. And from that, we've expanded to a Hope 2.0, which I mentioned, where if the arrest is more for a charge that's more serious or the person has a lengthy record, then we get the judge's involvement, and it's sort of a hybrid between traditional drug treatment court and our HOPE program. We've started the HUGS program, which is helping you get safe, whereas a combined disciplinary approach to doing outreach to individuals who we think might be likely to overdose again. And throughout those programs, we see quite often the intersection between mental health conditions and addiction illness. And so my team tries quite often, if someone is suffering from addiction illness and also needs mental health services, they give a combined approach to it. And that's one way to deal with a problem that the mental health crisis that manifests itself in many different ways. And you know, with COVID, what we've seen is that whether COVID has exacerbated and overshadowed the mental health crisis, but also the addiction illness crisis. And you see the recent numbers from the CDC, which we have had the highest number of fatal overdoses in the city of New York last year. And so we still have a lot more work to do.
So I know there are other parts of the HOPE program, like Ripples of Hope and public relations piece of it, but let me just go back to the HUGS piece for a moment. So is HUGS a proactive approach? So before arrest, before recontact with the criminal justice system, your folks are going out, meeting people where they are in the field and giving them assistance. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's right, and that program is developed with the mental health professionals here of Staten Island, our performing provider system, our PPS. And so there are different ways of identifying or collecting the data, identify individuals who might be likely to overdose again. Obviously, some may have been in contact with our office. Some may have had a non-fatal overdose, and because of the investigations of overdoses, we know who they are. And by the way, no one's charged for a crime from overdosing. It's simply trying to get them help and trying to keep real-time statistics. And by other means, gathering information and then proactively going out with a peer mentor, a gentleman, an individual who is in recovery himself or herself, but a social worker, a mental health advisor, whatever is appropriate under those circumstances. And we've had we started the program about a year ago, and we have about 250 outreaches so far. And we're working now with the PPS to expand the program even more dramatically. And so it's that type of proactive outreach that we bring to the addiction illness crisis and to the mental health crisis. But again, quite often we come across individuals who themselves are in crisis, and we really are short of places to try to bring them, to keep them safe. And in some instances, sadly, but truly, to keep society safe. And that's really where the focus has to be of the leaders who denounce the conditions at Rikers, rightfully so, argue for fewer cases of bail and fewer cases of incarceration, arguably correctly so. Not arguably, correctly so. But they're not doing enough to provide the resources and the safety net system to have people placed for the goals of keeping them safe and keeping society safe. So that to me is what's missing here. And I just hope that, wish that so many of our elected officials, instead of doing press conferences and tweeting their outrage, would roll up their sleeves and get to the work of providing the resources and the facilities that we do not have and that are sorely needed.
Yeah, well, thank you for that comment. I know we have in our work with Hope House, we've researched the importance of housing and a place to lay your head at night and to get the treatment. And it can be more effective than medication, even just a place, a supportive place to live. So can't agree with you more.
Dealing with a case currently, my staff was here late into the night trying to figure out what to do with an individual who had been arrested in our borough and who we were referring, it was a misdemeanor case, and so we're referring to assessment and treatment, and that individual no longer cooperated and appeared in another borough and became very threatening and aggressive towards public figures in both Brooklyn and in Queens. And so now this person is deemed dangerous, but has severe mental health issues, indications, and we don't know, what do? We have to keep that person safe. We have to keep the targets of his aggression safe. He has to go somewhere, and I hate to say it, given the discussion that we just had about young Mr. Scott, but the only place for him to go now is Rikers Island. There's no other place for him to go. So we're now faced with the choice of having to send someone to Rikers Island, which we know is probably, given his condition, the worst place to send him, yet he has threatened at least 3 individuals severely, and so we have to protect them as well. And there we're missing a safe place for people to go who need to be kept safe, maybe from themselves, and certainly society needs to be protected from until the issues are addressed. So that's, to me, the rub here, and that's what's not being talked about. If I get a lot of emails and phone calls from people across the city, advocates who say, close Rikers now, don't send people there. I'm happy to do that, but what do I do with individuals who are in mental health crisis, or individuals who commit very serious crimes? That has to be addressed as well. There has to be a balance, and right now that conversation is not balanced.
I hear you, and I guess one of the things I hope from these conversations, because we're hearing the same things from a lot of DAs, the same problem that you're articulating, and that is, the buck stops with me, but I don't have the choices I need that I think are necessary to deal with folks. And so perhaps the DAs can get together at a convening or a summit. I know DA Clark is preparing a summit on mental health for the same reasons. She's frustrated as well. So maybe there's a way that you can all work together to put the pressure on to get more funding for housing and secure housing or semi-secure housing, so that we have an alternative to Rikers.
And I just want to, I can add that I was a legislator.
Right.
I worked for an administration, so I know what it means to be in the other parts of government. It is also their job to have a summit, and they control the resources, and to meaningfully address the problem, which I respectfully submit is not being addressed, and it is a crisis, and we all own it. But the time for finger pointing is over. It's time to get to work, roll up your sleeves, see what works in other jurisdictions, and get those resources in place.
Right. Absolutely. And I think your voice is critical, DAs, and the police, because you all are on the front lines. You see it. So, as well as obviously impacted people on the other side. So hopefully these kinds of conversations will help, like you're saying, have people roll up their sleeves. So let's move on to the mental health court that you have in Staten Island. So Staten Island has a mental health court. It's located in State Supreme Court, which is a little different, at least in upstate, but it takes defendants charged with certain felonies, typically nonviolent felonies whose mental illness experts believe can be treated. Defendants accused of arson, weapons possession, homicides, or driving while intoxicated are generally not eligible. So it seems unusual to me that there's a felony mental health court, but not a misdemeanor mental health court. So what's the background on that? Why felony and not misdemeanor? And would you support, or do you think you need creation of a misdemeanor mental health court?
Yes, I support it vigorously. I've had conversations with the leadership of the court here on Staten Island. I've had leadership with the supervising judge of the criminal courts, and I intend to have a conversation with the new DC AJ as well. We are, it's a recurring theme here in Staten Island that we are the forgotten borough, and I know that people who aren't here from Staten Island probably are tired of hearing that, but this is a dramatic instance of that. The other 4 boroughs in the city have a full misdemeanor treatment court, meaning that felony cases and misdemeanor cases are in the treatment court, mental health treatment court model, which is that if someone takes a plea, they are given the opportunity and the availability of mental health treatment services, and generally if they follow a course as prescribed with the judge's supervision, the charges are then reduced or totally dismissed. And we have, and sort of in a broader sense, this is the alternative to incarceration model. I've created a full working ATI unit, division here in my office. As I said, close to 40% of the cases that we have now are in that. But there are many where we need that court supervision and court involvement and the resources that the other boroughs have. And unfortunately, we have not been able to get that here. And it's just it's advocacy. We've confronted the supervising judge or the chief administrative judge at hearings in Albany about it. Our legislators have taken it to them, and we just can't get that support. So what we're doing is sort of virtually, my staff is providing a mental health treatment court like service for people, but it's not the same. And regarding that individual who I spoke to you about, right now the charges are misdemeanors. So if he is arrested and he is put into Rikers, there's no mental health treatment court to steer him towards. And so it's a big hole in our ability to address the confluence of mental health, individuals suffering from mental health issues and the criminal justice system. So I'm glad that you're bringing it up. I hope people from OCA are on this program, and we will intend to do everything we can to bring it. We had a supervising judge in our criminal court who retired 3 years ago. He used to do it, Judge Alan Meyer, and he would find a way to get it done. After he retired, we never got a supervising judge back to our criminal court. And so we're now 3 years without a supervising judge and sort of adrift in that. And if you visit perhaps the mental health treatment court in Brooklyn, you see a fully staffed, fully resourced operation, and Staten Island doesn't have that. So we will continue to advocate for it because I think it's a critical piece in what we're trying to accomplish here, which is diverting individuals out of the criminal justice system and into the resources and support, counseling, medication, whatever they may need as prescribed by the professionals.
Got it. So let's talk then about the felony mental health court and the staffing of it. So who determines whether mental illness an individual can be treated in the mental health court? Does a court clinician decide? It doesn't sound like it, or do you have clinical staff? I think you said you did. Who makes that determination?
So from our point of view, our team, as I said, led by Ms. Wexler and ADA Jason Cohen, they review all the arrests from the night before, first thing in the morning, and try to identify maybe individuals who had previously been in the system and had some sort of mental health history. Maybe they had a 730 exam, which is a mental health exam ordered by the court. Maybe they had been connected services by a prior case. They also look at the individual's affect and how they present themselves when they're arrested, either by looking at body-worn camera What statements do they make? Is there an indication that this is someone who is in duress from a mental health point of view, from a behavioral health point of view? And then they will recommend to the arraigning ADA or to the prosecuting ADA to try to work with the court to connect that person. We also reach out to defense counsel, and we have a good working relationship with the public defenders here. It could be better. And I think that they could be more proactive, and they have resources to identify people sooner. And then the court also has the ability, as I said, at arraignment or during the proceeding to order an exam. And that is sort of a mixed bag process. So it's not as defined and as set as I think it should be. We think that there should be a screening process with virtually every arrest, but that's not the case, and we don't have those resources. In the other boroughs, there are resource coordinators in the court. So if you go to, for instance, Judge Demick's court, which is rightfully seen as a model in this area, and you go to the courtroom, there's an individual who is screening cases, who's connecting people to services. They have very regular meetings with the providers and the individuals to discuss individuals who might be good candidates or what their progress is and how things are going. And we're lacking that here. We have a Supreme Court judge now, Judge Jung, who tries to do it, but he's also one of our primary Supreme Court felony trial judges. Right now, he's dealing with a sexual assault trial, and that can go on for weeks. And so then the mental health treatment court falls by the wayside, if you will. It's not his fault. In the other boroughs, they have dedicated judges who do that full time. Here we have a judge who's really one of our best trial judges. I shouldn't say that, but I should say one of our most productive and efficient judges, and he's got to do, so it's not working. And we're a borough of 500,000 people. And believe me, the mental health crisis is as real here as anywhere else in the city. So we need help in that regard, and we'll keep advocating for it. And I thank you for bringing it up in this program, because it allows us to bring some light on the fact that we are underserved in this area.
Got it. So just a little bit more on the mental health courts and how they work. So there are certain, as we mentioned before, certain charges that are excluded, like arson, weapons possession, homicide, and driving while intoxicated from mental health courts. Are those categories excluded by your office, by the court? How did that happen that those were excluded? And are they always excluded? Is there a hard and fast rule?
No, so I think that's a general rule, but it doesn't mean that they are excluded from problem-solving approaches or alternatives to incarceration. DWI cases, for instance, quite often we will make an offer of treatment, but that's more, that's treatment for alcohol abuse or limitations on the ability to drive, taking a course, whatever is there. We will do that as well, but those cases don't get referred to a mental health treatment court. Serious violent felonies, for the most part, are not eligible for it.
And that's a function, sorry, of the court or your office?
Certainly, it's an approach that we bring to it, and the court is in agreement with that as well. I'm just looking at Amanda to make sure that is the approach that we take. Again, these are collaborations, right? Because we can advocate a position. There's defense counsel can say, yes, we want some sort of alternative incarceration. They can also say, you know what, the charges against my client are relatively minimal, so I'd rather just have my person released and either wait for a criminal justice proceeding or a resolution of the case and not go through these processes, or support us. And then the court has to be in agreement as well. Remember, at the end of the day, we recommend the court decide. So these are collaborations that I'm happy with the cooperation and agreement that we have most of the time.
Got it. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about defense counsel in Staten Island. Legal Aid Society represents the majority of defendants in mental health court. And in 2019, Staten Island Live did an article in which legal aid lawyer Samantha Small said that Staten Island Mental Health Court was a quote lifeline, and that it worked a majority of the time and was quote life-changing. In the same article, her boss, Christopher Pisciata, said, quote, "I think the court is currently being underutilized. We need people to be given the chance. We need more people being assessed and evaluated and approved for mental health court. And a lot of the decision-making doesn't rest with the court." He went on to say that, quote, "Currently we have seen a decline in offers by the DA of diversion through the mental health court for those who would be otherwise eligible and would benefit from the court's resources to change their lives." So can you respond to those comments? And has the number of people referred to mental health court increased since 2019?
Yeah, actually, it's increased dramatically since 2016 when we came into office. At that time, I think there were 9 or 10 cases, and we've increased them, I think, 4 or 5-fold. There are now close to 50 cases currently in the felony mental health treatment court. So I'm not quite sure where those numbers came from. I will say that in quite a few cases, the offer of diversion and alternative to incarceration has come in a different form. So it's through the HOPE program, through in some instances a DV batterers program, in petty larceny cases, theft prevention programs. So we're, as I said, we've increased 3-fold the number of cases that go to ATI to close to 40%. So, and the mental health treatment court is 5 times as many cases. So I'm not quite sure where those numbers came from, but I'm sure that legal aid would, I don't know if they would revisit it. I would say also that in 2021 alone, we've had 50 offers for mental health treatment court, and 25 have been rejected or refused. So we're offering, they're not all being accepted by the defendants and or their legal counsel. But my staff, yeah, as I said, I built a team that goes through all the arrests and do everything they can. And they have priority, by the way. If they deem that a case is appropriate for some sort of offer, the handling prosecutor is directed to follow their lead. So I certainly have more offers of mental health treatment court for them. So if they want to accept it, please give them my number. They have my number.
Yeah, I think they probably have it, but happy to help. All right, I'm going to ask one more question before we go to some of the questions that I think are coming in. And I'm asking this because you were a member of Congress, and it has to do with a federal law. It's a little bit complicated. I'm going to simplify it just because, believe me, nobody wants to hear all the details on this, but it's a provision that comes out of the Social Security law, and it's called the IMD rule, Institutions of Mental Disease. And it's a provision that discriminates, I think, against people with mental illness. It's the only provision in the Social Security law that will deny you Medicaid benefits based on the type of illness you have. So if you have a brain tumor in your brain, you're going to get Medicaid benefits. You're going to find an institution where you can receive that help. If you have schizophrenia in your brain and you need Medicaid, you may not. You may end up in jail or prison or homeless, because the IMD rule says if you have an institution of mental disease greater than 16 beds, you can't get Medicaid for people who are in your facility. And it was meant to discourage large asylums. You can't get scale, so you can't make it affordable, which really harms places like, our Hope House or other places that want to provide, kind of 20 beds or so, 30 beds in a small but high quality institution. And I would just say that these institutions exist, but they're called Austin Rigg and Silver Hill, and they're for, they're 20-bed facilities for very wealthy people who can afford it. So these facilities can work. There are no human rights violations associated with them. It's just we know how to treat people. We just don't want to provide it to poor people. And so I think it goes to the question of why there aren't more facilities like this that you started your conversation with. You know, we know, everyone knows that these certain population needs to be diverted to a safer place than Rikers, but those places don't exist because there's a gap in funding. So my question is, at a time when we're finally seeing the light on opioid, when we're finally seeing the light on some of these issues, do you think there's hope that Congress might change this IMD rule, which has been around since 1965? And can the DAs, through the DA Association, are they willing to kind of express their concerns to Congress and support rules, a rule change and legislation? Like Senator Booker has a great bill right now. He's pushing a bipartisan bill to change this rule. What do you think?
You know, I think that you're spot on. And as you know, I was a supporter of the establishment of Hope House when we spoke about it, and those types of facilities are needed more. I think we meant to speak about it. I said, please come to Staten Island and build one here. It's quite clear that the IMD rule is a serious roadblock to creating more beds that are so sorely needed. And that rule should be changed. And so we certainly look forward to expressing to Senator Booker and his co-sponsors that this is a law that should pass to change this terrible rule. Because otherwise we can't get out of this crisis unless we have safe places for individuals who are in crisis to get the treatment that they need to no longer be a risk to themselves, no longer be a risk to society, but also more importantly, to find a path to recovery. And so I think that the fact that you're advocating for that is wonderful, and we will certainly lend our voices in supporting that. While I was in Congress and the City Council, and even now, and even personally, the fact that we have to still talk about parity between mental health and physical health, or behavioral health and physical health, is travesty. And any public official or anyone involved in government who says, oh, we have a mental health crisis, but isn't willing to change that rule is being hypocritical. And so we look forward to joining with you to advocate for that and other methodologies to bring about safe and humane jails, limited but available when necessary, and the beds and support services for those who suffer from mental health, behavioral health issues.
Thank you. We appreciate all the help we can get. And so do the people who are stuck at Rikers and other places now with no places to go. All right, I apologize for looking down, but I'm going to now look at questions that are coming in. Our staff is forwarding me the questions. So I'm going to ask you a few questions from the audience. So, I mean, this is related. It says, what recommendations do you have concerning state laws and programs that would aid your diversion efforts?
Really, the laws are not so much the issue as much as the resources to provide the services. There are very few laws that, I'm just looking at my expert, very few laws that prohibit the availability of diversion on cases. So it is, as I said, is a collaboration amongst the DA's office, the defense counsel, the court, and of course the individual who's been charged with a crime. And it's really having the ability to do early assessment and have people in the courts who can help with the resource direction, and then having the resources available. And it's places. So many of the individuals need a place that is secure, but also have the right resources to help them in the immediate crisis and to get on with a stable and productive life. And so that's really the bigger concern. And we've worked with State Oasis and State Department of Health to create some facilities here in Staten Island for assessment, resource and recovery, we call them. We are waiting for years now for a inpatient facility for women on Staten Island that was promised 5 years ago. And I don't think ground has even been broken yet. So it's a question of making the hard decisions and the hard choices and having the stick-to-itness to make sure that these things get done. It's hard. It means that someone has to commit today to stay with it until the issue is solved. Unfortunately, I still don't see that with some of my colleagues in the other branches of government. So I hope that this advocacy today will help bring that about.
Yes, me too. And it's very hard. We've been at this for 7 years now. I am very interested. I just want to go back to the stabilization or crisis centers you're talking about that you successfully developed. You know, the Greenburger Center also works upstate, trying to bring these kinds of resources to rural, suburban, upstate communities that kind of like Staten Island that, don't have the resources. So I'm very interested. Could you tell us a little bit more about those stabilization centers and how long it took to get them online? And you worked with Oasis, you said?
Yeah, we worked with Oasis and some providers who were here on Staten Island to have as we developed the HOPE program, and we said, okay, we want to make an offer of diversion to individuals right in the beginning of the process, because, and again, remember that we're living at a time when it comes to addiction illness that one more usage means death because fentanyl is so deadly. And so we wanted to have a real-time place for people to go, not in a week or 2 weeks, but from the precinct or within 3 or 4 days from the precinct there. And we didn't have those facilities. And so we worked with Oasis to get a grant to establish. Now we have 2 24 hours a day, and then 5 others that are open on a more regular hour basis, so that an individual at any time who is in crisis, who has a need, there's a place that my peer mentors, my CASACs can take them to get connected to services. And so that's, and it's a wonderful resource for us to have because that means we can really work fast in real time.
Yeah, that's terrific. Congratulations. Okay, so this is a little bit of a long question, but I think it's important. My brother is disabled with an unusually severe form of borderline personality disorder. It's a hard one. And also an addict. I have attempted with his defense counsel when he's interacted with the criminal justice system to have him receive treatment. On one occasion, he was deemed ineligible for diversion because he didn't want treatment for his addiction. His responses to the questions were patently nonsensical. One day he admits he's addicted to a substance, but not mentally ill. He can't admit he has both problems at the same time. What can be done for people whose mental illness is so severe it prevents them accepting help, including but not limited to diversion?
So, and look, I have an expert here with me as well, and those are very difficult cases. What I will say to you is the way that we've patterned our program here is that if someone is arrested for a narcotics case, and in the assessment, it's determined that the issue is the mental health is sort of the prevailing issue, then that is the program or a program is prescribed that addresses that issue. So everyone who comes into our whole program, which is for possession of controlled substances, doesn't necessarily get a program prescribed for them that treats addiction or addiction only. So in some instances, it could be economic hardship, it could be homelessness, it could be vocational, it could be mental health directly. So it's there's a menu of services that can be provided once the issue is identified. It's very difficult. We don't, and if people aren't ready for treatment, we don't force them to treatment. Each program, each recommendation is tailored for that individual at that time. So that's why in some ways it's better than drug treatment court because it's not as draconian, if you will. It's prescribed to help them at that moment. And the idea is to keep them safe. We want to make sure that first they're safe, and then we get them on a path towards recovery, whatever the issue is, but it's different in every case. And we certainly understand that individuals' hardship or difficulties, because we see that sometimes, and those are very difficult cases. Yeah. If they, and I recommend to that person to call my office in Staten Island or not, and my folks will try to get them maybe into a path that could be more effective.
I'm sure that's greatly appreciated, DA. Okay, so this is about public defenders. It says, what do you think public defenders can do to help support clients who may be suffering from mental illness? What role do they have in this issue?
Yeah, they have a tremendous role to play, and I mean, they have a balance that their role in the system is a little different than mine, admittedly. Mine is to, a successful DA is not someone who gets convictions, it's someone who does justice. And that's not just a platitude, right? I'm not there to convict everybody, and that's not my role. The public defender's role is somewhat different because they are sort of theirs is to advocate strenuously for their client. And sometimes they may see that as simply concluding the process and having their person either released or have their case finalized, whatever path they may see is appropriate. I wish sometimes that they would see that with working with us, that if we go a little slowly, we might be able to help individuals get into services that they need so that they don't go back and through the revolving door of criminal justice, and that we address the issues that brought them into us in the first place. So they certainly could be more proactive in that regard, and for lack of a better word, maybe a little more aggressive when it comes to recommending services and getting their clients into a place that could help them.
Okay.
And meanwhile, protect their legal rights.
Okay. We have a question in the chat, and I'm not sure I recall you saying this, but it says, she says, what are the names of the private pay homes you referenced?
To the private?
I wonder if Lori's talking to me or you. The private pay homes I referenced were Silver Hill and Austin Riggs. DA, did you mention any private pay homes? No, okay. Oh. Okay. Let's see, hold on one second. All right, we have time for maybe one or two more. Okay, I don't know that this one, I don't think this one necessarily is probably appropriate for the conversation. Let's see. I'm sorry, I miss the days when we could be in a room and people could raise their hand and just have the conversation. So I feel rude kind of reading while we're having the conversation, but I'm not sure there's any. Okay, here's one. Has your office modified reincarceration for technical parole violations which relate to substance abuse? What impact will less is more have? And what other parole reforms are needed?
So I think that the less is more legislation which the governor signed will help in this regard. People should not be held for technical violations, and certainly in the instances where we have someone who has a drug possession case and they're on parole or probation, and we don't seek to violate them, just as we don't seek to ultimately prosecute them. We would try to give them the same offers. They would probably get the offer in what we call Hope 2.0 at arraignment, as opposed to in the precinct, just because, as I said, if someone has a more extensive record, we make the offer just with the help of the court, although the result is virtually the same. The case, although it's docketed, the case is sealed and we dismiss it. So we try not to, in almost every instance, I can't think of one we're not, I'm looking at my expert, where we would seek to violate someone or reincarcerate someone because of a narcotics possession case. We would try to keep them in the same path as someone who was arrested for those charges without the prior history.
Mm-hmm. That's encouraging. I know one of the criticisms of participation in drug courts or mental health courts is that if the person, quote unquote, fails because they relapse, which is a normal part of the disease, then they end up in a worse situation than what they would have. And it sounds like you all recognize that and try to avoid that outcome.
Yep. They, as I became more immersed in this issue and came to understand it, we quickly learned that relapse is part of recovery. And that's why the HOPE model in many instances was advantageous to the sort of historic drug treatment court. Because of that, if someone failed, there was severe repercussions, and also the overall approach maybe was too rigorous for someone who perhaps was not prepared to go down that path, but that we could help in the moment get to a path maybe in a few steps. And that's why we've taken this approach. There's certainly in the much more serious cases, drug treatment court still has a role to play. Mental health treatment court, again, is different as well. And certainly with the misdemeanor cases, it's not about re-prosecuting somebody if they make a mistake. It's about connecting them to services and hoping that through the court system, you can get access to better services and also help encourage individuals to stay with it.
Thank you. So in the last literally 2 minutes that we have, is there any final remark or comment that you'd like to make before we close?
Yeah, again, I just want everyone to know that for us and maybe, for many of the participants today, it may seem counterintuitive that in Staten Island, where we're known to be more of, I'll say, frankly, a law and order society, community, that we have increased dramatically the availability to alternatives to incarceration, to try to connect people who suffer from mental health issues, behavioral health issues, to services, and we want to do more, and we need help to do more. I have a lot of experience in government, as you mentioned, and I implore those who have the ability to take this issue on with the stick-to-itness that, in my opinion, does not exist today. Because the crisis at Rikers was created by policies of administrations and individuals. It's a disaster, and I don't mean to be cheeky, but it's not a natural disaster. It's created by human beings. And it shouldn't have taken a surprise visit by state and city legislators to see that facility was in crisis, that we need a safe place for people who are in behavioral health crisis. We have to balance that with keeping society safe. And that's a complicated issue. And it takes a complicated approach, and complicated issues require complicated solutions. Just can't close Rikers. You should, but you've got to maintain it in a condition that is humane and exemplary, not what it is today, and build the new jails that speak to what the individuals who will be there deserve, and what we as a city deserve as well.
Well, thank you, DA McMahon. We so appreciate your time and the time of your staff. I want to thank you for being here, and thank you to John Jay College and to my staff as well.
And if anybody wants to learn more about what we're doing here in Staten Island, please go to our website, statenislandda.gov. Thank you very much. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, President Mason, and thanks to all your viewers.
Yes, and thanks for everyone for joining us. We'll see you again for DA Katz on the 26th.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.